The way I came to gender studies was through my undergraduate education here at USM, and I actually had my first Women in Gender Studies, or at that time, Women's Studies class with Nancy Gish. And it opened an entire world of thinking to me, especially when I first read Simone de Beauvoir, you know. And so moving from that into graduate school, I became more and more aware of how important gender was as a way of looking at the world. When I finally chose a dissertation topic and a field to work in as an academic, I wound up working with women who had been captured in early American and colonial warfare between Native Americans and settlers. And in particular, I was struck by the way in which women's stories were actually written by men. And so the issue of gender is foremost in my research, especially in that book, and continuing in my research now on not only early American materials, but also in the work I do with an economics professor here at USM on immigration policies in China right now, and that's part of a larger project on the IMF and the World Bank and the way they write about things. So I'm always interested in rhetorics and the way people use language, and in particular the way gender inflects that use of language. So in the classroom, gender lenses, as I like to use it for me, help me to ask questions that may or may not have been included in a traditional approach to especially early American materials. So for example, I teach a course in Women in Gender Studies called Earlier Women Writers, and that course involves the use of the special collections here at USM, and my students get to read very, very little known pieces by women who wrote in the earlier periods, generally before 1850, 1860. And it's eye-opening for my students, and it's also eye-opening for me. And in particular, it has led to a project of my own now, some scholarship of my own that I worked on with some of my students previously on hermits in the early American period. And interestingly, the hermits are mostly male-identified. However, they are discussed in highly gendered terms that we would come to recognize as feminized positions. So that's a really crucial way in which my teaching and my research come together. The other course I love to teach is Intro to Women Studies, Women in Gender Studies, because it's the moment where heads explode in the classroom, and that's just always so pleasurable. We still need women in gender studies in particular because as much as there is a kind of cultural meme that says, oh, we've already done that, we're in a post-feminist phase in history, all we have to do is open the newspapers or look at history and see the ways in which historical forms of gender oppression, historical forms of gender triumphalism, where people actually were able to overcome or contest sex-gender oppressions, those kinds of historical formations still infuse the way we live every day, and that's why I think students should particularly take Women in Gender Studies courses, because at the very least it gives them a language through which to structure their world. And it's a language that's often marginalized, pushed to the side. We don't have ways of talking about how we inhabit the world through gender, which is a very strong and almost primal way we inhabit the world. So for example, in Women in Gender Studies intro class, I always ask the question, what's the first thing people ask about babies? Oh, is it a boy or a girl? And then I ask, why? And that's always a kind of moment that demonstrates to me both the foundational and the incredibly complicated terrain that Women in Gender Studies represents, and therefore is a must study for anybody, inside or outside the academy.